I'm Amy Dolan, and this is the Feeding People podcast.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Feeding People podcast. I am Kelly Dolan, and each week I have the true honor of producing this podcast with Amy and getting to listen to her conversations with our incredible guests. Today's episode is no exception. We're going to do something a little different this week, something that I don't think we've ever done on the show before. We are 7 episodes into this season, and as has pretty much always been the case on the show, there's been a lot of discussion about the power of food. But this season specifically, a number of our guests have talked about the way that food, and specifically access to food, has the power to literally change lives, change communities, and change history. Amy and I were reflecting on this recently, and we were reminded that back in 2019, Amy had a conversation with an absolutely amazing guest, Julia Turshen, in which they discussed this exact thing, how food can and has changed history. So we went back and we re-listened to that conversation and decided that we had to share it as a part of this season. Whether you remember hearing that episode back in 2019 or this will be your first time hearing it, I'm personally just so excited for you to be able to get to hear Julia and Amy talk. Julia Turshen is a best-selling cookbook author, a food writer, she's a food equity advocate, and she's the host of her own podcast called Keep Calm and Cook On. She's also the founder of Equity at the Table, which is a database for food industry professionals that features only women and gender non-conforming folks and focuses primarily on people of color and the LGBT community. She is amazing, and this conversation is amazing. Thank you so much for listening to and watching the show each week. The energy around our guests and the conversations this season and the feedback we've been getting from you all has just been wild and has meant so much to us. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And now here's Amy's conversation with Julia Turshen.
Julia, thank you so much for being on the show today. I can't believe this is happening.
Oh my gosh, my pleasure.
Your podcast, Keep Calm and Cook On, is my favorite. Your guests are fantastic. You're just a fantastic host. I love listening to it. I feel like I'm taking notes on like how to be a better host when I'm listening to your show. But you're just so cool and you ask such good questions and just feels like you're sitting with a friend talking about food and life. And so thanks so much for being on today.
Oh my gosh. Thank you. That was so kind. Yeah, no, it's like been the best excuse ever to just ask people all these questions I want to know. So.
Yeah. Is that like your normal posture anyway? Do you just that's how it comes across, that you just love to like sit down and ask people good questions?
Yeah, I mean, I really do. I do love that. But I feel like when you as you probably very well know, like I think when you introduce like a microphone into it, I don't know, it gives you permission to ask some more things you might not normally ask.
Yes.
So yeah, I really enjoy it. But I think in general, just like a very curious person and very curious about, other people and just how we're all figuring things out. So yeah, it's been a lot of fun. Thank you.
Yes.
That was very kind.
Yes. Well, it's great. I have more kind things to say, so prepare yourself. But how would you introduce yourself?
I would say my name is Julia, and I am a cookbook author, and yeah, I host a podcast, and I really love food, and I really love people.
That's it. That's all of it. I love it. Okay, so you've, like we mentioned the podcast, you're also a cookbook author, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I love your cookbooks.
Thank you.
My friend gave me your book, Feed the Resistance. Early 2017, I was creating a dinner church here in Chicago called Sunday Supper Church. And as we were doing that, we were realizing when we gathered together at the tables, the food like nourished us and strengthened us and empowered us to go out and fight some injustices here in the city. And so it was kind of the first time I saw all of those things come together for myself: food, faith, and activism. Mm-hmm. And a friend gave me your book and I was like, what? This is kind of what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So
awesome.
How did the book come together? Well, thank you for the book. It's meant so much to me. And how did this come about?
Well, it's super, makes me super excited and happy to hear your experience of the book. The book came out, so it came out in the fall of 2017, and it was absolutely sort of like born out of the most recent presidential election.
Yes.
And basically, yeah, long story short, I was on deadline to do a whole other cookbook that had nothing to do with politics or activism in any type of way. And then the election happened, and I felt just a lot of things, including just scared and tons of adjectives, insert whichever one you want.
Yes.
And so I wrote to my editor who I was working with at the time, and I said, can we put the other book on hold for a second, and can we make a cookbook that is about about making the world hopefully a little bit better through food and all the different ways you can do that. And we did it. We did it super, super quickly. And by we, I mean the over 20 contributors who gave either recipes or essays to the book. And it's like a book kind of built by a community for so many communities. And yeah, there's recipes in it, there's essays, and it's all ways to kind of give back to your community. And food just lets us do that in so many different ways. So the book really celebrates that. It's full of ideas. It's really like a resource guide is kind of how I think of it. And yeah, it was awesome because we got to include all those people. And we also gave all of the proceeds from the book to the ACLU. So just by purchasing the book, just doing that, you don't even have to open it. I mean, I encourage you to, but just purchasing the book kind of helps, protect civil liberties, which is sort of like an amazing thing. And making that book really kind of changed my work and changed my life. And I mean, those are big things to say, but I mean it because I got to know everyone who contributed to the book. So I got to really expand my community in this way that has been very, very meaningful. And it really taught me, that a cookbook can be so many things. Sure, a cookbook can help you figure out what to make for dinner, but it can also help you figure out how to, get involved in wherever you live, and it can, help raise money, and it can help expand a community. It can do all these things. And so that was a super just empowering and gave me a lot of pride in what I do in this way that I hadn't felt before. I mean, I've always felt really proud of my work, but this felt like, oh, this is bigger than me, which is a cool feeling.
That's so beautiful. And I mean, I'm one little person who's saying it was bigger than you, of course. I mean, the way that it impacted me and our community here in Chicago. But yeah, that it's so cool that in the process of creating it, it also changed your own life. What have you noticed since? How is food connected to resistance and privilege and power? Has anything new emerged in you since writing the book?
Oh my gosh. Well, it's I should say a lot has emerged for me that feels new to me, but it's not anything new. But it's helped me understand things that have been true for a very, very long time. And I think food has always been tied to revolution. And that, as the minute you take bread away from people, rice, whatever is the staple, that's when really terrible things have happened. But food has also been the answer in lots of terrible moments in time. And, it's kind of reshaped the lens that I look at history with. And, you see these moments of civil uprising and amazing moments of, just civil rights happening in history. And they tend to happen around food, so much of the gay rights movement happened, Stonewall is a bar. The Compton cafeteria, it was, a place where people ate. These things happen in places where people gather, and people gather around food. And, food can also be used to really, truly feed the resistance. It's part of why I chose that title for the book. And one person who I think about all the time and who I learned about in making Feed the Resistance is a woman named Miss Georgia Gilmore, who is very, very active in the civil rights movement. And I learned about her through one of the contributors to the book, whose name is Cheryl Day, who is a amazing, amazing person, one of the best, if not the best bakers in this country. She runs a bakery called Back in the Day Bakery in Savannah. She's just like the kindest person. And so she did a recipe for Feed the Resistance. Cheryl made these. They're like so delicious. These like chocolate espresso pie bars that are like, oh, it was so decadent and so good. And she was inspired to make that recipe by Georgia Gilmore. And Georgia Gilmore ran something called the Club from Nowhere during the Civil Rights Movement. And the Club from Nowhere was a group of other women like her who were Black women who worked as cooks or, in kind of like, households and different occupations like that. And they couldn't afford to be on the front lines of the movement. It would mean risking their jobs. Most of them were working for white families. And they quite literally fed the civil rights movement. So they would prepare cakes and sandwiches and chicken and all these different foods. And they would sell all that food to all the people who were boycotting in Montgomery, who are, boycotting the buses. And they would sell the food because people had to eat something during, this moment. So they needed something to eat. And then they would take the money and put it right back into the movement. So there was something called the Montgomery Improvement Association, and they did things like buy tires for the cars and buy gasoline for the cars that were transporting people, because just because people weren't getting on the bus didn't mean they didn't have to get to where they were going. So there were all these things that were happening. And Georgia Gilmore and all these women were feeding them and then using the money to pay for all this stuff. And they really used food to just fuel it and make it happen and, show up for their community. And it's just like amazing. And it's so cool to me that they called it the Club from Nowhere. And it's very kind of clever because when anyone asked, where the money came from, they would just say it came from nowhere. And they were telling the truth.
Oh my gosh, yes.
But, they couldn't, be caught or anything. And she went on to run kind of like this restaurant out of her house. And I guess, I've read a lot about her. John T. Edge, who runs the Southern Foodways Alliance, he wrote about her in his last book. And I think Martin Luther King was like not only a regular at her kind of house restaurant, but he also was like an investor. And the most poignant thing about her, and there's, plenty of poignant things, but she, on the day she passed away, she had been cooking. And she was making, big pans of food. And at her service, they served the food that she made. So,
oh my gosh.
Right until the end. I mean, it's unbelievable. So, I got to learn about Georgia Gilmore from putting together Feed the Resistance because Cheryl told me about her. And then we got to, include that story so other people could learn about her. And then they could make Cheryl's recipe, and they could kind of really remember it, because not only did you read about this phenomenal woman, you've also made this thing, and then you really remember it. So yeah, that's just, one example.
Wow. What is it about food? I feel like I'm always trying to understand its magic.
Yeah, it's hard to put words on. Yeah.
Right.
I can try, but it's hard. I think it's hard because it's actually really simple. I think, I think food is something we all have in common. And
right. Yes.
It's this need that we all, and by we, I mean literally every person in the world, we all have it in common. And we all need it and we can all relate to it. So it's this unbelievably personal thing, but also totally universal. So there's that. I think cooking in and of itself is this magical thing that we do. I've cooked my entire life. I cook pretty much every day. And usually I'm not thinking about this in these terms, but when I stop and think about it, it's amazing that you can turn these things into something you can eat. It's really amazing. And I also believe so much, and, I got to write about this in the introduction to Feed the Resistance. I think there's something about cooking, specifically at home, that is, it's such an individual experience. It's something most of us do by ourselves. But when we do it, we are in this amazing moment of solidarity with so many other people. And, I think about it when I'm, slicing onions and, peeling carrots and stuff, and these things that can be a little bit boring. And then I just stop and think about, there's so many other people doing this exact same thing at this exact same time. And I every time I think about that, it just, I don't know, it makes me feel part of something. And I think that's really valuable. And I think also when we feed people, it's such an act of love.
Yes.
And it's, it's such a gift, and it's such glue, to hold people together, families, friends, whoever it might be. And so I think all those things, and, there's plenty more. It's a really powerful thing. And it's, and it's something we can often take for granted because it's, such a part of our everyday lives. But I think that's where the power is, because it is part of our everyday lives, and it has all this power to it. So that's sort of unbelievable.
I've never thought about the uniting factor on the side of cooking amongst all of us. I only just think about how we all need to eat and how that connects us as humans. I love that you said that. I've never thought about how when I'm cooking in my kitchen, so many other people are doing the same thing with such similar ingredients.
Yeah.
And that also unites us and connects us in our humanity. I've just never thought of that side of it.
Yeah. And I think specifically, I usually, when I do think about that, I'm usually thinking about other women who are doing the same thing at the same time.
Yes.
And I keep using the word power, but I think there is just such power in that, this collective of women across the world. And it's amazing.
Right. It's like, what other things are there even in life that we're all doing, around the same time or every single day? Probably aren't many things. Breathing, maybe?
Yeah. Drinking water. I don't know.
Yeah, right. So too. Is cooking a creative outlet for you? I always wonder, like, people who cook professionally, is it also creative, or does it mostly feel like work?
I mean, it totally feels creative to me, but it also does often feel like work because it is work. I mean, cooking is like physical labor, and I think that's, it's very easy to romanticize it, and sometimes it's, like you're just hungry and it's time to make dinner, and it doesn't have to be like a poem,
Yes.
But it definitely does like fuel my creativity, and it's really remarkable to me that I've loved to cook my entire life, and I still feel excited about it, and I love figuring out if we're having friends over, I love thinking about what we're gonna make. If a holiday's coming up, I love planning that. I love just making dinner for my wife and thinking about something she would enjoy, and is there some creative spin on that I can make? And when I write my cookbooks, my favorite part is just figuring out like my list of recipes, like the table of contents. And it feels like this little puzzle I get to put together and think about. And, if I'm going to include a recipe, why is it worth including? And how am I going to make this thing particular to me? Or what story am I going to share? So it's like a total creative process that I love. But yeah, sometimes, peeling the onion is just peeling the onion.
Yeah. Right. Nothing creative in that. So you mentioned always cooking and always being interested in cooking. Tell me more about what cooking was like for you as a kid, or food was like while you were growing up. Like, how did you, I'm always so curious how people are interested in cooking at such a young age.
Yeah. I mean, I wish I could tell you like why I got interested in it. But I just can't remember. I just have always been interested in it. I've always wanted to be in the kitchen. I think part of it, I mean, I've definitely thought a lot about this. I think part of it was that I grew up around a lot of books, and specifically around lots of cookbooks and books about kind of like homes and design and stuff, because my parents worked in publishing, and they mostly worked in magazines, and they also designed like books on the side. So I just grew up around just lots of the things that I now work in, like books and magazines and these types of things. So I was exposed to them from like a really young age. So I think that has a big part of it, because I was really drawn to them. Like I definitely treated cookbooks like, kind of my version of a children's book. And, they're a safe thing to give kids, like, like,
yes,
things are going to work out. Like,
I feel like mostly. Like
yeah,
sometimes.
no, that's true. Yeah. But I loved watching people cook on TV. And when I was a kid, it was before the Food Network started, but I would just watch public television like constantly, and just anyone cooking on TV. I just loved watching them. And I used to watch the show Great Chefs on the Discovery Channel. And, I found a lot of happiness in those things. And it also made me feel really like safe and taken care of to watch people prepare food or to read about it. And I think that's a big part of what drew me to the kitchen when I was young, and continues to draw me to the kitchen. It's like, it's absolutely where I feel the most safe and taken care of. And, I'm really fortunate that I grew up in a very safe home, and, I was taken care of. But my parents worked full time since before I was born, and they weren't around like a ton, like especially during the week. And I was very much raised not only by them, but also by my childhood babysitter, who I still am very, very close to. And her name is Jenny. And Jenny and I just hung out in the kitchen all the time. And not that she was necessarily cooking or I was, but it's just that's where we were. You know, I think that's true for plenty of people. Like, you know, you hang out in the kitchen in your house. And but Jenny really let me cook, and my parents really let me cook. You know, I didn't have like an easy bake oven or anything like that. They really let me be in the kitchen, and it was really empowering as a kid. And I think, yeah, I felt like safe in the kitchen, but I also felt, empowered. And I got to feel kind of like in charge in this way that I didn't in other parts of my life. You know, I had an older brother and we had kind of a tough time growing up. But when I was in the kitchen, like it was my show, you know, like, and that was a great feeling. So I think all of that has like really been a huge part of why I cook now, but definitely got me in the kitchen when I was younger. And it's also kind of how I got to know Jenny too, because we have really different upbringings. You know, I grew up in New York, and, you know, she was a big part of raising me. And I had like a, you know, very like privileged life. And I was this, you know, little old white Jewish girl in New York. And Jenny is from St. Vincent, which is like an island nation in the Caribbean. And she would always cook like Vincentian food for herself. And I always wanted to eat whatever she was having. And she would share her food with me. And it's really like how I got to know her, and, you know, ask her about where that food came from. And I loved it, and I just wanted to eat it all the time. So I feel like from such a young age, before I had any language around any of this, I knew that like food that wasn't the food you know, your family made or that you grew up with, like it was a way to get to know someone. So
wow.
yeah, that's a long answer to your question.
I love it. Can we talk for a minute about your Jewish faith?
Sure.
I'm half Jewish, and my mom's side of the family is Jewish. And so I was raised Jewish and Christian. And now at this point in my life, I feel like it's the Jewish part of me that is why I love food and why I love gathering people. And I'm always trying to like understand that better. And all I can really understand is like the memories I have of my mom and my grandmother and my great grandmother, and the ways that they cooked for us around the holidays, the ways that they, you know, shoved us out the door with food, like all of those things. And so for you, how does your Jewish faith connect with food and feeding people and, you know, gathering together for great meals, if it connects at all?
Oh, it absolutely connects. I feel like like everything about me that identifies as Jewish is about food, like 100%.
Wow.
Like I absolutely would describe myself as a Jew. Like I think I am Jewish, but I'm not like a practicing Jew. I don't consider myself a very religious person. And, you know, Judaism means very different things for all sorts of people. But for me, like when I say I'm Jewish, it's not because I go to synagogue regularly at all. Like, it's because of the family I grew up in and the meals we had that had these like very distinctly Jewish foods. And it's around the meals we had at holidays, but also the meals we had at like delicatessens and, you know, stuff like that. And that to me is like, that was what meant being Jewish to me, was eating these particular foods, sometimes on particular days, or going to, you know, certain restaurants and having, again, particular foods in a particular setting. And so I absolutely think like for myself, and I think for many people, there's just such a huge correlation between being Jewish and eating certain types of food. And yeah, it's super, super strong. And those foods like carry so much meaning with them.
Yeah.
And I feel like, I mean, like sort of like a stereotype, but I mean, at least for like the like New York Jewish family I grew up in, it's like, that's how people say they love you. Like they make you extra food. They send you home with it. You know, you get this big portion somewhere. Like it's absolutely wrapped up in all that.
Oh yeah. Like if my mom has made us a big meal and my entire family walks out, she's planning like giant containers that you're taking everything home. And it's just like, that's how she loves us.
Yeah.
And
1,000%.
I feel all that love. That's so beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And I love, to me, even more than like the Christian tradition part of my faith, the food that's connected to the holidays specifically, and the Jewish faith and the symbolism that goes with it is just so rich and deep and meaningful. I love it. We hosted our first Seder this year in our apartment, and it's just like every little thing you eat and taste.
Everything means something.
Everything.
Yeah. And I think that's so cool. And I love all the symbolism, and like the writer in me especially like loves all of it. And it's also, I think, like as a kid, it's like the only way I really like kind of understood what all that stuff was about. I was like, all these things people were saying, I was like, what? But then it's like, oh, like, you know, on Rosh Hashanah you have honey because it's sweet and you want like a sweet new year. And I was like, oh, okay, like I get it. So it's like food helps me understand so much. And I think that's true for so many people. I think for like Jewish food too, there's so much about survival in it. And you know, I got to write, there's a new cookbook out called The Jewish Cookbook. It's a very straightforward title. It's an amazing book written by a woman named Leah, who's great. And I got to write the foreword for the book and kind of reflect a lot on everything we're talking about. And you know, when you talk about Jewish food, you're talking about so many different types of food from, you know, there's Ashkenazi Jews, there's Sephardic Jews, there's Mizrahi Jews, you know, from all different places. And, you know, Jewish people live in all parts of the world, and it's like, it's this food of a major diaspora. So it's like food that people have held on to so they can hold on to themselves and like their culture. And so it's like, you know, each little thing at a holiday is symbolic, but it's also like the whole thing is symbolic. Like, it's amazing.
Yeah, it's so beautiful to talk about the way that we connect with each other as humans, like that connecting in faith through this kind of food through the holidays is just so beautiful. Julia, I could go on all day here, but I want to ask two final questions.
Sure, yeah.
First, like, how do you feed people today? I'm so curious about that because I'm sure there's a million ways, but like, what are the main ways that you feed people you love? And then
literally, with food? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And then I'm so curious, like, how do people feed you?
That's such a nice question.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So yeah, I would just like, I'm scanning through like my week, like a normal week, and how I feed people. So my wife and I live, as I mentioned, in a rural area, so we eat most of our meals at home. So every day, at least one of us cooks something. So we are always kind of feeding ourselves and each other. And that's definitely like someone who feeds me a lot.
Yes.
And I would say the other kind of major thing is every week, every Thursday morning, Grace, my wife, and I do a volunteer shift at this place near us called Angel Food East, which is basically like a local like Meals on Wheels program, essentially. And so we do the Thursday morning shift, and we work with a few other volunteers on our team, and we've been doing that for a couple of years. And during our shift, we make a meal from start to finish for like the 60 clients our group serves.
Wow.
And we make it kind of based on like whatever is left over or like whatever was donated or, it's like a funny process of figuring it out. And then we cook this meal and then we portion it and we package it. And then like this other group of volunteers comes to deliver all the meals. And it's just this great, great group. So yeah, every week we do that. We also do some volunteering with our local food pantry. And then I wouldn't say like we entertain, like we don't throw like dinner parties like ever, but maybe we used to, but I feel like we're in this phase right now where we just like, we usually have like a friend or a couple of friends over for a meal, probably like once a week or so. Just like, come on Sunday where like I'll make extra whatever, like it's like no big deal. And it's just, it's a really important thing, I think, for us to be able to like open our home to our friends. And we live a couple hours outside of New York City, so we moved from the city, and so we have friends who live in the city who will come visit and stay for like a weekend or something. So I love cooking when people come. And so those are, I would say, the ways I feed people, and then the ways people feed me. I mean, Grace literally makes me like meals all the time, and I love when she cooks, and I feel so taken care of. But I would say, yeah, to me, the other ways I get fed feel like probably way more metaphorical. Like, I love conversations like this. I love getting to, I don't know if you feel this way, but it's like I love hosting a podcast for that reason. Because like when I can connect with someone in that way and they're open to sharing stuff and like answering my questions, it's like it feels like such a gift. So
yes, exactly. I feel the luckiest to ask the questions and to sit down with people just like this and just like you, because it really does feed the soul and the body. So you're totally right. The best meals are with your spouse and partner and loved one on the like average weeknight.
Oh, totally. 100%. Yeah.
I think that like dinner parties are everything. And I'm like planning my life from one dinner party to the next. But it's like, it really is Monday night with my husband and puppy.
Yeah.
I
totally get it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just read, there was just this article in the New York Times that, not to like be morbid, sorry, but it was this beautiful, beautiful article that like a friend shared with me, and I was just like crying reading it, because it was this piece about how people who have lost their spouses, and it was about like a bunch of older people, and like about that mealtime is like the hardest thing, and they were talking about just what you just said, like that kind of like the everyday Monday night kind of dinner, and like it was just such a I could share it with you. It's just such a beautiful testament to like kind of like day-to-day life and like who you share it with, and just what those like small routines and rituals are. And yeah, anyway, I just read it earlier today, so it's on my mind. So when you say that, I'm like, oh my gosh, totally.
Yeah, please. That sounds lovely. Julia, this has been so special. Thank you so much for this time. Thank you for sharing your heart. You're just like the loveliest spirit and soul. And you just put so much like goodness and light into the world. And I'm a recipient of it. And of course, so many other people are. And I just thank you for that. Like, thanks for this time and your kindness. And please keep going.
Oh, that was so nice. Thank you so much. I'm glad that's recorded. I'll listen to that whenever I feel down.
Yes. Great. Make it into like a little, like a ringer for your phone or something. You can just hear that play over and over.
I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.